All right, so when we talk about congruency of triangles, we have to have certain things as background in order for us to be able to determine that information. And one is trying to determine what corresponding parts of triangles are, okay, corresponding parts. So if you look at this, this is where we're going to start. We're going to start with congruency of triangles. And the problems that I'm going to assign today seems like a lot, but it's really an easy assignment, so it's not going to be that difficult, even though it seems like there's a lot of problems to do. But at the top of your page, I want you to write these problems. These are the problems that are going to be due at the beginning of class tomorrow. It's problems number, Ms. Barney, 1 through 34. Problems 1 through 34. Okay. So this starts off with talking about houses located in San Francisco, California. The two triangles outlined on the houses have the same size and shape. So you're looking at these two houses right here have the same size and shape. If you've ever been to San Francisco, anybody here ever been to San Francisco? Driven up and down the streets, looking at the houses, that's pretty much what it looks like, right? They're kind of cookie cutter, but they're, excuse me, they're older houses and they're right next to each other. They are right next to each other. I don't know how they get in there and paint the side of that house. I guess maybe you wouldn't have to if it never gets any sunlight on it. I guess it would never fade, but I'd always be concerned about that side of my house. But anyway, suppose that you have triangle ABC. So here's triangle ABC, and you're going to slide that to fit over the top of triangle DEF. So you're going to take this triangle, you're going to slide it over the top of this triangle. When the vertices are matched in this way, angle A and angle D are what we call corresponding angles. Okay? So if you're going to take this triangle and slide it over the top of this, they're telling you that angle A corresponds to angle D. Side AC, so side AC, this bottom side here, is going to correspond to side DF. Remember, when you're talking about angles, you always use the angle symbol before you mention which angle you're talking about, because that's shorthand for angle A. And when you're talking about sides, you want to make sure that you're using the line segment symbol over the top of the two letters that you're referring to, AC, okay, or DF. Corresponding angles and corresponding sides, are examples of corresponding parts. So figures are congruent. If all pairs of corresponding angles are congruent and all pairs of corresponding sides are congruent. Meaning, if this fits exactly over the top of that and it matches, then that tells you those two angles or those two triangles are congruent, because the angles wind up being the same, or the corresponding angles wind up being the same, and the corresponding sides wind up being the same. Okay? So congruency means same size and shape, and not congruent means that they are different sizes or shapes. Okay? And we've talked about congruency before. We talked about that term. So if we're looking at this and we want to list corresponding parts, given that triangle JKL is congruent to triangle RST. So first of all, they're telling us those two are congruent. It wants us to list the corresponding congruent parts. Okay? Corresponding means the same angle in this one compared to the same angle in that one. Now, there's a couple of different ways you can do that. One is to look at the figures and compare those two. Okay? So if you look at this, you can see that angle J is congruent to angle R. So this angle here is the same as that angle there. Those two are the corresponding angles. Okay? You have the right angle. It's the longer side here versus the shorter side here. Okay? So these two would be congruent. You also have angle K is congruent to angle S. So the 90-degree angles are both congruent. And then you have angle L is congruent to angle T. So angle L is congruent to angle T. As well as that, you have the sides. So the sides of KL would be congruent to the side of ST. The side of KJ would be congruent to the side of SR. Now, if you remember last time we used, when we were listing congruent parts, we said that if we call this KJ, that's the same as JK. And it is. If we call this SR, that's the same as RS. But when you're talking about congruency, when you're listing congruent parts, you could not do this. They don't want you to list this as KJ congruent to RS. That would not be correct. KJ is not congruent to RS, even though they are both the same length. KJ would be congruent to SR. If I start at the 90-degree angle and go to this angle to label the side, I have to start at the 90-degree angle and go to this angle and label that side. Okay, yes ma'am?
What about when you're doing like, say like JL? Would it have to be like JL and then RT or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely would have to be that way. She said if I start here and list this side, would I have to start here and list this side? And the answer to that is yes. You would have to do that. Okay? It's got to be listed the same way in both. If I start at the bottom here and go to the top one, I have to start at the bottom here and go to the top one. Okay? So the way that you list those parts now are going to make a difference. Now you say, why does that make such a difference? Well, when you look at triangles, you can determine which sides are corresponding, but also when you look at the labeling of the triangles here, here, here. When you look at the labeling of the two triangles, you can determine which sides are congruent by the way it's listed, because this is listed in a very specific order. This starts at J, goes to K, goes to L. So J, K, L. If I list this one as J, K, L, I have to list this one as RST. RST. Has to be in the same order on each. Mr. Edminson. You sure can. Uh-huh. Okay. You're being sent out. You already have done homework assignment. And you can watch the video later if you need to catch up. All right. So when you have this labeled this way, there's a reason for that. I don't really need to look at the pictures to determine which angles are congruent to which angles. I don't really need to look at the pictures to determine which sides are congruent. Because I can look at the way they have this listed and tell you that angle J is going to be congruent to angle R, because it's in the same position. Angle K is going to be congruent to angle S. And angle L is going to be congruent to angle T, the same positions. At the same time, the sides are going to be listed the same. So side JK is going to be congruent to side RS. That side KL is going to be congruent to side ST. And side LJ, because it's going to wrap back around, LJ is going to be congruent to side TR, just by looking at the way they have these labeled. So they have to be in corresponding order. Let's go to the next page. So again, they have two triangles that are congruent. They're telling you they're congruent ahead of time. It says identify all corresponding parts. Write a congruency statement. Write a congruency. What is a congruency statement? Congruency statement is this. Okay? This is the congruency statement. Congruency statement is telling me that this triangle is congruent to this triangle, and it has to be in the proper order. Now, it doesn't have to be triangle ABC. triangle ABC. It doesn't have to be that. It could be triangle CAB. But if I list it as triangle CAB, it's going to be congruent not to triangle FDE, but to triangle EFD. Okay? So if I start with CAB, I have to start with EFD. Okay? Now order matters. Before I was talking about line segments and I said congruency doesn't matter when you're talking about those two, it's the same thing. Now it matters when you're talking about triangles because it has to be in the corresponding order. Has to be in the corresponding order. So here you have corresponding angles that are congruent. A is congruent to F, B is congruent to D, C is congruent to E. AB is congruent to FD, so AB is congruent to FD. You see it's ordered the same. BC is congruent to DE, and AC is congruent to FE. Okay. Anybody have a question on the ordering? Does it make sense what we're talking about? Has to be in the same order? Okay. It's really important here, and it's important here because now I can look at your congruency statement, and without going back here, I can tell you what angles are congruent and what sides are congruent just by looking at this statement. Okay, that's why it's important to have this statement correct. I'm looking to see if they had. Well, let's go through it just for a minute. Make sure we got it here. All right. So let's look at the exercises now. Should be on the bottom of page 236. This is starting with number 1. It says, determine whether the angles or sides are corresponding angles, corresponding sides, or neither. Okay, so when it uses the term corresponding, it means is C or angle C in the same position on this triangle as it is angle L on that triangle. And when I say the same position, I mean the same place in the other triangle. What I don't mean is necessarily the same direction. Because if this triangle is turned, right? If this triangle is turned, I'm not necessarily talking about the angle here, I could be talking about the angle up here. If it's rotated, okay? So be careful how that's listed. Okay? So you just need to determine whether or not they're corresponding angles, sides, or neither. If you look at this part, it says they're giving you that these two triangles are congruent, and it says determine by using this statement whether or not these are congruent sides or angles that are corresponding to the side of the angle. Okay? Determine the congruent side or angle, that corresponds to the side or angle. So here's an angle, you want to find its corresponding angle. Here's an angle, you want to find its corresponding angle. Here's a side, you want to find its corresponding side. Okay? All right. Any questions on using this part to determine corresponding parts of congruent triangles?
Are we doing this on a separate piece of paper?
You can do it right here. No, you can do it right here. In these exercises 9 through 12, it says find the missing length or angle measure given that triangle LMN is congruent to triangle PQR. Okay? So you have to look at the first triangle, triangle LMN, find the corresponding parts on the other triangle, and see if you can match up the congruent sides. So you're going to fill in the blanks here. Okay, cool. No problem. How you doing? Hope you had a good break.
It was alright.
Yes, sir.
With this whole M angle P, what does that mean? Like, what's the M for?
Okay. Measure.
Okay.
That means measure, right? The lowercase m means the measure of angle P. So what's the angle measurement of this angle?
P.
This would be the length of the side. Okay. So if you went to the measure of angle P, you would find angle P, and you would have to find that measure.
Yeah,
And you're going to find that measure based on its corresponding measure. Okay?
alright.
Because they're telling you those are congruent.
But on that one, since it's like flipped upside down, when it's NLM, would it be RPQ? Or does that not matter?
No, LMN would match to PQR. So they're telling you here.
Oh, okay. Oh yeah.
So that's turned.
Okay.
So you want to make sure and match up the right ones. All right. So go ahead, Dave.
With it, never mind. I lost my train of thought.
You sure?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
So all of these questions you want on here, you don't.
Yeah, you can do them on here. There's room. Yeah, there's room. If you look at this one now, number 13, it says determine whether or not the triangles are congruent. If they are congruent, write a congruency statement. Well, how would I know the triangles are congruent? Well, I would know the triangles are congruent if all the sides are the same length and all the angles are the same measure. So this indication here says it's the same length as this. This indication here says the same length as this. This indication here says, and then also the angles are showing the same. Okay? So if all the angles are the same measurement and all the sides are the same measurement, then you're being told that those two triangles are congruent. Okay? Corresponding parts determine whether or not the angles or sides are corresponding angles, corresponding sides, or neither. So again, it's just another way to answer the very first question we started. Here we have congruent triangles. Determine which of the following is correct, is a correct congruency statement for the triangles in exercise 14 through 19. Okay? Which one is, so where is 14 through 9? Okay, so based on these two triangles here, which one of these statements is the correct statements showing these two triangles are congruent? Only one is correct. Okay? Let's go to the next page. Again, these are fairly simple questions, so that's why I gave you so many. It says identify congruent parts in the diagram. So they're telling you how these two triangles are represented in congruency. It says complete the statement with the corresponding congruent part. Remember, if you're talking about an angle, you want to use the angle symbol. If you're talking about sides, you want to make sure that the letters are represented by the side indication on top. Okay? This bottom one here, it says naming congruent triangles, naming whether or not the congruent statement correctly describes the congruent triangles shown in the necklace. Okay? So see if these two are in the right order. See if these two are in the right order, corresponding order, right? That's all they're asking you to do here. Are they correct? Are they incorrect? And then 33 and 34, it says write a congruency statement. Congruency statement, again, is this, right? When it talks about writing a congruency statement, it wants you to write a statement showing that those two triangles are congruent, but you have to make sure you do it in the correct order. Okay. Questions on this assignment? Okay, so what I'm going to have you do, I'm going to have you do this one here real quick. Do problem number 33. Write a congruency statement for that, and then we'll just check it. So everybody just write a congruency statement for this one, and we're just going to check it. Does everybody have that done? Just that one problem? All right, so we'll start off with Catherine. What's your congruency statement?
PRQ is congruent to SUT.
Okay. And Zach, what's your congruency statement?
PQR is congruent to STU.
Say it again.
PQR is congruent to STU.
Okay. And the next one?
QPR is congruent to TSU.
One more time.
QPR is congruent to TSU.
Very good. Next.
I got PQR is congruent to STU.
Okay, next.
QPR is congruent to TSU.
Okay, very good. David.
QRP is congruent to TUS.
Okay, next.
PQR is congruent to STU.
Okay, very good. Next.
PQR is congruent to STU.
Okay, next.
QPR is congruent to TSU.
Yep, next.
PQR is concurrent to STU.
Okay, next.
QRP is congruent to TUS.
Okay, very good. Next.
PQR is congruent to STU.
Okay, next.
Oh, PRQ is congruent to SUT.
Okay, very good. Next.
PQR is congruent to STU.
Okay, next.
PQR is congruent to STU.
Okay, very good. Order, right? All correct, not all the same. Not all the same, but they're going in the right order. They're going by corresponding sides and angles. So very good. That's what this particular assignment is all about, because in order to go forward throughout the week, we have to know what corresponding sides, we have to know what corresponding angles represent. If we don't know that going into later in the week, we can't do what we need to do for the other things that we're going to be studying. Okay? Very good. 1 through 34, right here on this page. That's your homework.